My HO fined me for having too many flowers, so I turned my yard into a jungle. When I bought my house, I thought I was buying peace. It's in one of those quiet, picture-perfect neighborhoods. Identical beige houses, identical driveways, identical smiles from people you never actually see outside. It's the kind of place where the HOA has more power than the mayor, and the lawns all look like they've been copy-pasted from a brochure. I didn't think much of it at the time. I was just excited to have my own space. I work from home. I'm not a loud neighbor, I don't throw parties, I keep my trash bins tucked away, and I wave politely when people walk by. But my one indulgence, my one thing, has always been my garden. I love flowers. Always have. When I was a kid, my grandma had this wild, overgrown yard full of color and life. She used to tell me that every flower had a personality. The roses were proud, the daisies were cheerful, the lavender was calm and graceful. When she passed away, I planted lavender outside my window in her memory. And when I bought this house, I made a promise to myself that I'd create a space that felt alive like hers. First it was small. A few tulips, some hydrangeas by the mailbox, roses along the front porch. People even complimented it. My next-door neighbor Susan once said, "It's nice to see a bit of color on this street." She was one of the few friendly ones. Most of the others were polite but distant. Everything was fine until the letters started. The first one came in a plain white envelope from the HOA. It looked like junk mail, honestly. I almost tossed it. When I opened it, it said I was in violation of Section 4.3b, excessive decorative flora. I remember staring at it for a full minute thinking, what does that even mean? I had no idea I could have too many flowers. They fined me $50. I laughed, actually laughed out loud. I figured it was a mistake, so I called the HOA office. Some woman named Cheryl answered, her voice all syrupy and fake polite. I explained that there must be a misunderstanding because my yard wasn't overgrown or messy. She said, "Oh, it's not about mess. It's about uniformity." The board voted that no property should exceed 6 species of decorative plants in front-facing areas. 6 species. I said, "Are you telling me you counted my flowers?" She said, "Well, the committee did note several varieties. Roses, tulips, lilies, lavender, marigolds, hydrangeas, and..." She kept listing until I lost count. I said, "So, you're fining me for having a variety of flowers?" She said, "Sir, this is to maintain neighborhood consistency." I couldn't believe it. But fine, I decided to be diplomatic. I said I'd attend the next HOA meeting and discuss it in person. That was my first mistake. When I walked into the meeting room, it felt like stepping into a suburban courtroom. A long table up front, 5 board members staring down at me like I'd vandalized the neighborhood instead of planted petunias. The president, a retired guy named Dennis who wore polo shirts like armor, greeted me with this smug half-smile. I explained that my flowers were well-kept, trimmed, and nowhere near anyone else's property line. That they added value and color. He cut me off and said, "This isn't about value. It's about conformity. We take pride in our neighborhood's aesthetic." I said, "So, you want every house to look identical?" He said, "That's correct. It's part of our brand." Our brand. Like we were living inside a housing company commercial. I tried to reason with them. I showed pictures of my yard. One of the other board members, a woman named Carol, actually said, "It's beautiful, but it sets a dangerous precedent." I asked, "A dangerous precedent?" "It's flowers, not barbed wire." They voted to uphold the fine. I left before I said something that would get me arrested. Over the next few weeks, the letters kept coming. More fines. More warnings. $50 became $100. Then $250. They added late fees. They threatened legal action. My friends told me to just pay it and avoid the hassle, but I couldn't. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about the principle. If they thought they could bully me into making my yard as dead-looking as theirs, they were in for a surprise. So, I did what any rational, slightly petty person would do. I turned my yard into a jungle. I went all in. Weekends became planting marathons. I bought new soil, new seeds, new pots. I planted ferns, hostas, and creeping vines. I added a trellis and let ivy crawl up the side of my porch. I planted sunflowers tall enough to peek over the fence. I filled every gap in the soil with something green. I added a bird bath, solar lights, and even a small water feature. Within a month, my front yard had transformed into a lush, colorful paradise. It was vibrant, alive. Butterflies fluttered everywhere. Bees hummed lazily between the blossoms. Birds actually came to visit. The neighbors started to notice. Kids called it the jungle house. Susan, my nice neighbor, brought me lemonade one afternoon and said, "You've made this whole street prettier." But the HOA hated it. A few weeks later, I came home from a grocery run to find Dennis and two others standing on my lawn with clipboards, taking photos like they were inspecting a crime scene. I walked right up to them and said, "If you're looking for the tiger, he's out hunting." Dennis didn't laugh. He said, "You're making a mockery of this neighborhood." I told him, "No, Dennis. I'm making it look like it has a soul." He didn't like that. The next morning I had a certified letter taped to my door. They were fining me $100 a day until I removed the excess vegetation. They called my property a visual disruption. That's when it got personal. I started researching. I dove deep into state and city property codes. Turns out, in my state, homeowners are protected if their gardens promote biodiversity or support pollinators. HOA rules cannot override environmental protections. Guess what my garden was full of? Native pollinator plants. Every single one of them. So I made a binder. A thick, glorious binder labeled Evidence of Compliance. It had photos, receipts, plant lists, and copies of state environmental laws. I even got a letter from a local gardening society confirming that my yard was beneficial for local ecology. At the next HOA meeting, I walked in, dropped the binder on the table, and said, "Before you accuse me of breaking rules, maybe read the ones that actually matter." Dennis tried to argue, but I had him cornered. When I quoted the specific section of state law that nullified their fine, he looked like he'd swallowed a lemon. The board murmured. Carol, the one who'd called my garden dangerous, actually looked impressed. They didn't admit defeat, of course. They said they'd review my case. So I waited. 2 weeks later, I got a letter saying the fines were being temporarily suspended pending review. That was their way of backing down without admitting they were wrong. But I wasn't satisfied. I filed a formal complaint with the city's environmental board, including details of how the HOA had tried to penalize me for supporting pollinators. The city took it seriously. They sent an inspector who came out, took photos, and told me my garden was a model for eco-friendly urban design. That's when things got really interesting. A month later, the HOA received a notice from the city. They were being investigated for violating environmental regulations by enforcing anti-ecological rules. Turns out, a few other residents had also complained. People who wanted to grow vegetable gardens or plant wildflowers but had been fined too. Dennis tried to hold one last emergency meeting to save face, but word had already spread. Half the neighborhood showed up. Some people were furious, not at me but at him. Others quietly thanked me for standing up. I sat in the back, arms crossed, and let the chaos unfold. By the end of the night, Dennis announced that he was stepping down for personal reasons. The applause that followed was not subtle. A new president took over, a younger woman named Rachel. She actually knocked on my door a few days later holding a clipboard. I braced for another confrontation, but she smiled and said, "I just wanted to say your yard's incredible. Would you be open to helping start a neighborhood beautification initiative?" I almost laughed. After everything, they now wanted my help to make the neighborhood more beautiful. I agreed on one condition, that they permanently remove the 6 species rule. They did. Over the next few months, I helped several neighbors start their own small gardens. Nothing as wild as mine, but enough to add color to the street. It changed the whole mood of the neighborhood. People started talking to each other more. The kids began helping me water plants sometimes. But the real cherry on top came a year later. The city held an annual Green Streets competition for the most eco-friendly neighborhood block. Guess who won? Ours. The local newspaper even came by to take photos. My garden was front and center in the article. The headline: From HOA fines to floral fame, one resident's fight for green beauty. When the article came out, Susan brought me a copy and said, "Dennis must be spinning in his recliner." I laughed. Sometimes, late in the evening, I sit on my porch with a cup of tea, listening to the rustle of leaves and the quiet hum of crickets. The solar lights cast this soft glow through the plants, and I think about how ridiculous it all was, how something as simple as flowers turned into a full-blown war. But it wasn't just about flowers. It was about standing up for myself, for beauty. For individuality. These neighborhoods are designed to make everyone the same. Same lawns, same fences, same silence. And I refuse to disappear into that sameness. Now when I walk outside I smell lavender and honeysuckle instead of the sterile scent of chemically treated grass. I hear birds instead of leaf blowers. People smile as they pass. And every time I see one of the new little gardens popping up on the block I feel proud. Because maybe I didn't just win against the HOA. Maybe I changed something here. A few weeks ago, Rachel told me they're updating the community bylaws to encourage eco-friendly landscaping. I asked if Dennis had to approve it. She laughed and said, Dennis moved away. I like to think he's somewhere staring at his perfectly uniform lawn, wondering why it feels so empty. As for me, I'm good. My yard's wild, my bees are thriving, and my mailbox is half covered in blooming petunias. I still get the occasional passive-aggressive look from one of the old board members when I mow the lawn, but they never say a word anymore. They know better. Sometimes I look at all of it, the vines, the flowers, the buzzing life, and I can almost hear my grandma laughing. She'd love it. She used to say, if people can't see beauty, plant it anyway. So that's what I did. They wanted conformity. I gave them chaos. And somehow that chaos made everything better. I turned their uniform little world into a jungle. And in the process I found peace.